in the building, and Maureen previously notified me that she was absent, and I believe we have Christy and Nick on the Zoom portion of the meeting. So if you would confirm that you can hear us and we can hear you, then we'll have a quorum. Christy or Nick?
This is Nick.
Yes,
thank you very much.
Christy Kendall here.
Thank you very much, Christy. Thank you very much, Nick. So we do have a quorum, and if you would please all stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you very much. We will now move to public comment. At this time, public comment will be taken on those items that are within the jurisdiction and control of the Planning Commission. Additional public comment periods may be allowed on individual agenda items at the discretion of the chairperson. It is requested that members of the public on those comment on those agenda items when they are considered. In addition to opening public comment will be also taken on each item listed on the agenda when they are discussed by the Planning Commission. Public comment is limited to 3 minutes per speaker on matters over which the Planning Commission has jurisdiction, supervision, or control. The Planning Commission wants to encourage the respectful consideration of all views by members of the public. If the content is willfully disruptive of the meeting by being irrelevant, repetitious, slanderous, offensive, inflammatory, irrational, or amounts to a personal attack, or interfering with the rights of others, the individual will be asked to stop speaking. So we will begin public comment. The microphone over there is turned on. If you would please sign in and state your name, and then we'll start the timer for 3 minutes. So is there opening public comment?
Jim Slade. I would again like to thank Chairman Walder for inviting me to make a presentation at your last meeting on the building permit allocation system. I hope that I provided some helpful historical context since I was literally in the room where it happened back in 2006 and 7. Following my presentation, I welcomed tough questioning from some Planning Commission members and tried to explain the letter and intent of the ordinance as I understood and remembered it. I would remind the Planning Commission, however, that your bylaws state that commissioners have a duty to treat fellow commissioners, staff, applicants, and the public with professionalism, respect, and courtesy. One member, in my opinion, violated that duty in his questioning by aggressively and repeatedly accusing me of changing my mind, of trying to decrease the total number of allocations and the 2% growth rate, all with no evidence whatsoever, and continuing those false charges even after I refuted them. In so doing, he was impugning my integrity. He kept trying to put words in my mouth, but his claims were demonstrably untrue. Yet he persisted in his false attacks. That is not treating someone with professionalism, respect, and courtesy as required by your bylaws. He claimed that because I supported staff's position on the allocation, that was proof that I wanted to reduce the total number of allocations. Apparently, he wasn't paying attention to staff's presentation prior to mine. Sam Booth made it clear that they proposed removing the sentence that said any remaining unused allocations would be surrendered at the end of 2031. To further clarify the suggested change, Mr. Booth said, quote, "We don't want to affect the overall 2% rate or the total number of allocations. We don't want to require a forfeiture of allocations in any way." That was quite clear. But that didn't fit that member's narrative, so he continued to belittle both staff and myself with false claims. More than 4 hours into the hearing on this item, that member stated, "I don't like the excess allocations going away." 10 or more times it had been clearly stated by Sam Booth, Deputy DA Taylor, and myself that no one was advocating getting rid of any excess allocations. Apparently that member couldn't quite comprehend that, or he thought that we were all a bunch of liars. Late in the meeting he also said, "What's the point of denying, approving, or continuing if 3 county commissioners don't care?" That's the unfortunate thing that all of us in the room are dealing with right now, and I see it in every single person's face, except for Jim Slade. As to the gratuitous insult to me, His statement was as incorrect as it was inappropriate. And if he didn't realize that the Planning Commission was mostly advisory, he shouldn't have applied. And if he doesn't accept that now, then he should resign immediately.
Thank you. Is there additional opening public comment? Seeing no further opening public comment, as of 1:05, we will close opening public comment. We will now move to approval of the agenda. This is for possible action, approval of the proposed agenda. The Planning Commission reserves the right to take items in a different order, to combine two or more agenda items for consideration, and to remove items from the agenda or delay discussion relating to an item on the agenda at any time. We do have just the one item on our agenda today in the notice. I will call for public comment if there is any public comment on the approval of the agenda. Seeing no public comment on approval of the agenda, then members of the Planning Commission, if they have any questions or things that they would like to raise before we take a motion on approval of the agenda. If not, I'll entertain a motion.
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
Bryce moves approval of the agenda. Is there a second?
Second.
Mark seconds the motion. Is there any discussion? Seeing no discussion, we'll call for a vote. All those in favor of approving the agenda say aye.
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 Any opposed to approving the agenda? No noes. So on this, there's 6 votes aye and no votes nay, so the agenda is approved. We'll go to approval of the minutes. This is for possible action. Approval of the draft minutes of the Planning Commission meeting on August 10th, 2021. We have the minutes in the packet. I think they were very well done. It was a long meeting, but I found everything in order.
For the record.
Thank you very much, Bryce. Other comments or a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
Bryce moves approval of the minutes. Is there a second?
Second.
Brian seconds approval of the minutes. Is there any discussion? Seeing no discussion, we'll call for the vote on approval of the minutes of the August 10th meeting. All in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed say nay.
Mr. Chairman, this is Nick Meyer. I was not present at the last meeting, so I'm going to abstain.
Thank you very much, Nick. So in this, there's 5 votes aye, no votes nay, and Nick abstains. So the motion to approve the minutes is agreed to. We will now move to the first agenda item, and I will read this into the record. This is for possible action, discussion on appeal of the Administrative Hearing Panel's conditions of approval for DP 21-0141, a tentative parcel map, appealing condition B1A that states, quote, "The applicant shall dedicate 10 feet of public right-of-way to Douglas County along their property line fronting Genoa Lane, State Route 206, as shown on the tentative map," unquote. The subject parcel is located at 651 Genoa Lane in the A19 Agriculture 19-acre minimum parcel size zoning district in the North Agricultural Community Plan, APN 1319-13-000-007. The applicant is Bob Coker, manager, Frank Settlemeyer Properties, LLC. Lucille, you will be handling this from the staff, and I would note to the members of the Planning Commission and the applicant and anybody in the audience, we have 2 parts to this agenda item. The first is a determination that the appellant has standing and is aggrieved, and then should that be approved, we would move to item 2. So Lucille, unless you have something we need to address on the first part of the motion, or unless the applicant has any comments that they need to make, I think we can move expeditiously and just begin with the proposed motion for standing. Seeing no need to have other speakers, we'll come to the Planning Commission. Everybody can read on packet page 105, and I think Lucille has this. If we can go back, Lucille, to the first slide with the recommended motion. This would be the recommended motion that the appellant has standing and is aggrieved. I'd be happy to open it up to my colleagues who are here, or Christie or Nick. Do you have any questions of the staff, or do we need to have any discussion on the question of standing that's listed in recommended motion number 1?
Mr. Chairman, this is Nick Meyer. I don't have any questions.
Thank you very much, Nick. Anything on your end, Christie,
do
on this
not.
first? Okay.
No, I don't have any questions. They're on the first
Okay.
one.
Members of the Planning Commission who are here, any questions that we need to raise with staff? If not, I'll entertain a motion on the first part of the agenda item. Excuse me, Sam Taylor, would you like to interject?
If I may, I'd just like to ask Ms. Rao a quick question. Did the owner of the property, Mr. Settlemeyer, sign the notice of appeal?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Sam. Thank you, Lucille. Bryce?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move to find the appellant, Bob Coker, manager, Frank Settlemeyer Properties, LLC, has standing and is aggrieved pursuant to Douglas County Code 20.28.020B1I, and that the representative manages the property for the owner of the project, and the representative, Bob Coker, manager, has provided staff with written correspondence opposing condition B1A.
Thank you, Bryce. Bryce has made the motion. Is there a second?
I'll second the motion.
Mark seconds the motion. Is there discussion on the motion? Seeing no discussion, then I'll call the question. All those in favor of finding that the appellant has standing and is aggrieved will vote aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed to the motion, vote nay. So there are no nays. So on this vote, there's 6 votes aye and no votes nay. So we have approved the first part of the agenda item that the appellant has standing and is aggrieved. So we can move forward to item 2. Again, that's in packet page 105. We will hear a presentation from staff. We will hear from the appellant. And then the options available are listed on packet page 105. So, Lucille, you can begin proceeding, and then we'll move to the appellant.
Thank you, Chairman Walder. Can we ask that make it available for me to share this on Zoom? I don't know if that's Colleen or who at this point. Okay.
Go ahead, you should be able to.
Okay. No? Okay. Okay, for the record, Lucille Rayo, Community Development. Vicinity map, so the subject parcel is in blue. We have the big green arrow pointing to it. It's along Genoa Lane, which is also known as State Route 206. This is the parcel map with regards to tentative parcel map 210141, where the conditions resulted from. So the highlighted yellow above here in the northern section of the parcel is Genoa Lane. This 2.5 acre parcel is the parcel that's being subdivided. It's actually 2 parcels, the 248 acre parcel and a 2.5 acre parcel. That was part of the parcel map request. The appellant has 3 concerns. His first concern was previous dedication of right-of-way along Genoa Lane. I have a map that you'll see further along in the presentation. The proportionality of land division versus dedication of right-of-way, and what he's saying is, we're only asking for a 2.5 acre parcel, you're asking us for 1 acre of dedication for right-of-way. It's not proportional. And we'll show you how it is proportional. And then he's saying it's part of the trails plan. Trails plan does not require dedication. We're saying it's part of the transportation plan. Dedication of right-of-way is required with tentative parcel map. We have many examples throughout the county of tentative parcel maps that have been required to dedicate right-of-way when it has not been dedicated. We have 2 examples in the staff report as well as part of the presentation. I have some other examples if you need more examples of tentative parcel maps that were required to dedicate right-of-way. So adequate roadways, public facilities, and improvement standards, Chapter 2100-090, roadway facilities states, adequate roadways, new development with the exception of parcels created by division of land into large parcels, all require dedication of right-of-way. I won't read the whole thing. It was part of the staff report. I'm sure you all are familiar with that. This is an example, an exhibit that County Engineer Jeremy Hutchings, who's sitting to my right, has put together for us. He's showing the dedication along Genoa Lane and how it was acquired throughout the years, what the existing right-of-way is, what the proposed dedication is for the appellant. And so we can refer back to this if you have questions later on. Jeremy would be happy to answer any questions you might have. But this was just an exhibit to show you that there has been right-of-way dedicated along Genoa Lane. This is a map from 2006. It was for a neighboring parcel, William and Jonna Hutt. I circled the areas that show you, it's actually a zoomed-in portion of the map itself, where a 10-foot additional public right-of-way was dedicated. And then this is also showing that the right-of-way the width does vary. This map is for Frank Sotomayor, who is the appellant. This is a previous map. This is from 2005. The yellow section here is Genoa Lane. Here's the north arrow, so this is the southern portion. Down here, it's, I did a little zoom in over here to show you that it did say additional right-of-way was offered for dedication with the final map for this parcel map. Yes, there were additional parcels in this map versus the map that went before the administrative hearing panel, but dedication is required no matter how many parcels are being requested. This is a road section we included as part of the PowerPoint. The county engineer can explain this more in detail if you'd like it explained, showing the width and of the 80-foot right-of-way that's required along Genoa Lane. When I'm done with my presentation, if you'd like the county engineer to explain anything, he'd be happy to. So Douglas County's position is that the exaction is proportional because the developer is dividing a large parcel adjacent to a roadway, and the exaction is needed to ensure that Genoa Lane meets current county standards for a rural collector road, 80 feet in width. Without these types of exactions, roads would be undersized and create public health and safety problems. In this case, the developer is dividing up more than 251.91 acres, and the exaction is limited to a 10-foot strip adjacent to the existing road, resulting in an exaction of just over 1 acre. That equals to less than 0.5% of the 200-plus acres. So 0.5% of the total that he's asking for, the county is requiring for right-of-way. As a result, the exaction is proportional to the size of the project. The Board of County Commissioners upheld an almost identical appeal from the same appellant at the January 3rd, 2008 meeting regarding a different parcel on Genoa Lane. The owners of parcels to the west and other locations of Genoa Lane have dedicated property to make the road alignment correct. Furthermore, these types of exactions are consistent with long-standing practice in Douglas County. They spoke about the trails plan versus the transportation plan. They're saying it doesn't, the trails plan doesn't require it, but the transportation plan does require it, along with code provisions, so that the county does ensure that rights of way are developed. As far as the trails plan, page 19 of the trails plan has a map where it shows there's a proposed on-street trail, including Genoa Lane. And page 26 of the trails plan describes a bike lane extending eastward along Genoa Lane, Muller Lane, Mottsville Lane, and Centerville Lane to Highway 395. We need the right-of-way, that's required, and trails plans also need that additional right-of-way to create the trail. So it's required for more than one reason. Staff has provided evidence to uphold the administrative hearing panel's decision regarding condition B1A for land division application DP 210141, a tentative parcel map for Bob Coker, manager of Frank Settlemyer Properties, LLC. The Douglas County Board of County Commissioners has set forth the standards contained in Title 20, the Douglas County Transportation Plan, and the Douglas County Design Criteria and Improvement Standards. Requiring dedication is a common practice with regards to land division applications. As shown on Figure 1 and Attachment 3, there's history of dedication along Genoa Lane. Denying staff's condition B1A would be precedent-setting and contrary to what has previously been approved along Genoa Lane. Grant or deny the appeal. The Planning Commission may deny the appeal by finding there was a sufficient basis to uphold condition B1A for development application DP 210141, which states the applicant shall dedicate 10 feet of public right-of-way to Douglas County along their property line fronting Genoa Lane, as shown on the tentative map, or grant the appeal on the grounds that condition B1A relative to tentative map application 210141 cannot be sustained. Any questions from me?
Thank you very much, Lucille. Jeremy, did you have anything to add at this point before we move on? I think we'd probably be well served if we hold the questions. But go ahead, Jeremy, if there's anything on your behalf that you wanted to add or clarify.
Yeah, thank you. Jeremy Hutchings with Douglas County. No, Steve did a good job. Nothing right now.
Okay, thank you very much. If anybody did have quick questions of staff that they need clarification on, if not, I think it might make more sense to jump to the appellant. Brian or Mark, go ahead.
So, Jeremy, can you tell me what's going to go in this right-of-way? Why do you need extra 10 feet? I mean, if we're not putting a bike lane in there, would you need 5 feet?
Yeah, thanks for that question, Mark. It's basically getting down to try to enforce the codes that we have and following the transportation plan. The transportation plan has General Lane listed as, I believe it's a rural minor collector that has an 80-foot right-of-way standard. And as you can see from this exhibit, there it is there, it's a real mixed bag out there on Genoa Lane. As you're coming off the highway, it's only 60 feet, jumps to 70, back and forth as you go out to Genoa, where it finally becomes 80 and meets our standard. We don't have any specific plan right now to widen it, but if you go out there and look at the existing pavement and the lane widths, it doesn't quite comply with what the county's current standard is for these collectors. So it's really nothing to do with what we're planning today, but what we may need for the future and to comply with that master transportation plan that we have in place.
Brian, go ahead.
So not being familiar with those prior development applications, so on LDA 06069, when we get the extra 10 feet on the south side, was that a division of the property to the east of that does not have the extra 10 feet? I mean, how did the one property next to it not have the 10 feet when the other one did? I'm not familiar with what was divided when we had to ask for that 10.
Maybe I can get you, I think it's the other parcel on the other north side. So on that exhibit, but maybe we can flip back the other one, Lucille. No, my exhibit there. So from this perspective, Brian, the parcel, the main length of it that we had obtained 10 feet to get to 70 feet was where that says in blue 10 feet dedicated under LDA 05064. That whole strip along there, we jumped from 60 to 70 feet. So we didn't extract, we really need 80, but we didn't take 20 from the north side. We took 10 from the north side because that was developing at the time. So now with this side developing, we're requesting, or we asked the dedication of another 10 feet to get to the 80. So 10 from each side of the highway to keep the road aligned as you're going out to Genoa.
I guess maybe I rephrased that incorrectly, but you're talking about LDA 05064, the 70
Correct.
feet.
Correct.
I'm talking about the 10 feet dedicated under LDA 06069 that got us to 80 feet in the section prior to hitting a property that has no 10 feet before then hitting the settlement property that's going to have the 10 feet. We have a property in the middle without it. That was not in the LDA 06069 application. That was the property to the west.
Right, and again, as I said, it's a bit of a mixed bag out there. So parcels develop at different times, and we extract that, get to comply with the master plan as we go, rather than going in and just obtaining the property outright. It's just how it. So it's piecemeal right now. So Theoretically, the main ranch, I believe that's the main ranch house right there with the silos, would do a development at some point in the future, and at that point would request the 10 feet to bump it out to 80.
And if that other parcel in between never submits a development application, we'll have a 80, 70, 80 road.
Right, and if it came down to a point where the county actually needed to do an improvement to the road that we needed that right away, it'd be an eminent domain situation potentially.
That's
but
not a good situation to ever ask for.
Exactly.
Oh, it's not a solution.
So as we go, we obtain the right of way that complies with the future master plan, so we don't have to get into that situation in the future.
So in Settlemeyer's case, if he doesn't do this, eventually if you need it, you just eminent domain and you take it anyways. That's what you kind of just said.
Yeah, theoretically. But as you can see, it kind of develops over time. So the north side had developed, and then the huts had developed. I'm not sure if the timing's 06 and then 05. So I guess Settlemeyer did do the north side first. Then a year later, looks like the huts went in for some work. And then, here we are with the south side of Genoa Lane. So it is what's historically been applied to development over the years in the county. That's how right-of-way is acquired, and these mixed bags are straightened out.
And then my next question would be for Lucille. We say 1 acre is proportional to 2.5. However, 2.4 acres is also proportional to 2.5. There is no definition of proportional. So when we're looking at proportional, is this a cost figure? Is this a acreage figure? I mean, when I'm reading this, I can't find anything that tells me what proportional is. Because like I said, 2.4 is the same thing proportional to 2.5. But what's the limitation that causes us to go in excess of what's considered proportional? Do we have any definition for this, or any historical that could say that, we've taken 50% of what's being divided? Or nearly?
I'm going to defer to Sam Taylor because I believe he has an explanation for that.
I wish it was just crystal clear and a bright line rule. Sam Taylor again, Douglas County DAs. Essentially what you have is 2 cases, Nolan and Dolan, U.S. Supreme Court cases relating to exaction. And there's a statement in there basically talking about a finding from the U.S. Supreme Court in terms of that there is no mathematical formula, there is no certainty. It's just sort of a case-by-case basis, really, is what it is. And I would like to note for the record that it isn't a 2.5 acre parcel that we're talking about. You're creating 2 parcels. So in its entirety, it's over 250 acres. So that's the proportionality. If it was 2.5 acres alone and they were just looking to maybe build a house, and then we were exacting something in relation to, I don't know, a design review or something. I don't know. You can't even do that. But regardless, they might have a good argument there. But the trouble is the size of the 2 lots when taken together, 250 acres. And I think, Lucille, you said it was less than 1%, correct? Or 0.5%? So, I mean, that's sort of what you're looking at is, you have to juggle this. And I'd also point out for the record that, if you don't do these exactions, you're imperiling public health and safety. I mean, collector roads are made a certain width for a reason. This isn't like something that's made up. This comes from standards defined from U.S. Department of Transportation. Over time, we have determined that this width of road is necessary to sustain certain levels of traffic at certain speeds, which is why you have those roads being in a certain width. So, and the collector roads is based on traffic as well, and speed.
So essentially, when we look at proportion, it's the fact that 2 properties are created, and therefore it's the total of the 2 properties, not just the 2.5. Correct.
That is correct, because you're creating 2 lots.
Correct. Thank you.
Mark?
Yeah, so Lucille, can you help me and refresh my memory as to the requirements to create a 2 to 5 acre parcel every 15 years, and the requirements that the landowner must abide by in the future, and what he had to abide by in the past?
So you're talking about the agricultural 2 to 5 acre parcels that's part of land division code? Yeah, so he's only doing the 1 2.5 acre parcel this time, so he has to wait, I believe it's 5 years, and then he can ask for another one. So they can ask for more than one, well, he could ask for 3, he could have asked for 3 parcels now, and then waited 15 years. But I believe he's just asking for the 1 2.5 acre, with the tentative parcel map, he asked for the 2.5, and then the 200 plus, and then he has to wait 5 years, and he can apply again.
Okay, didn't he also have to have some ownership of this property previous?
Correct. Part of the code states that you have to own at least 100 acres of irrigated agricultural land to make that request.
And was there or was there not a timing requirement? I remember, this thing's gone through several iterations, but at one time you had to own the property for, I believe, 10 years before you could even ask for this.
For the record, Lucille Rayo, Community Development. Yes, I believe it's 3 years now. Is it 5? Okay, well,
I think it's 10.
Previously 10 years? I think it might, I'm not positive. We'll look up code.
Okay, thank you.
We'll get that code section.
Thank you, Mark. Other quick questions here, or of Nick or Christie, before we move on to the appellant? Okay.
None for me, Kurt.
Thank you. I'm not sure who is speaking on behalf of Frank Settlemyer Properties, whether it's Mr. Coker, or I believe there were some people from Resource Concepts, Inc. If you would please state your name, and then you may proceed in comments that you'd like to make on the appeal that you have filed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For the record, Jim Caviglia on behalf of Frank Settlemyer Ranches and Bob Coker. So I guess I'll start with start with the beginning, which is how this application was filed, which was under the heritage parcel provision that Mr. Nedenrip just referred to. I guess the point of that parcel is, when you read it, it says, the creation of these parcels is designed to allow landowners of more than 100 acres of irrigated agricultural land a means of disposal of a small portion of their property. And the purpose, again, is to preserve irrigated ag land. And it looks to me like here the punishment for preserving irrigated ag land is we're going to take 1.5 acres of your land for an 80-foot wide road that may or may, I don't know. I don't ever imagine in my mind Genoa Lane being 80 feet wide. My understanding is that the paved section of Genoa Lane is somewhere between 25 and 27 feet now, and has been for, I don't know, as long as I've been alive, as long as I've seen it. And I just think this isn't proportional, and that's what we got to ultimately get down to. The purpose of the heritage parcels, as I understood it when this was all created, was to prevent a bunch of 19-acre, what Arnold Settlemyer used to call ranchettes. What we didn't want to see in this valley were these 19-acre ranchettes. And this hopefully prevents that. Now, if we were going in there to ask for 13 or 14 19-acre parcels, which is allowed, and which was done across on the other side of Genoa Lane, I would say that the 10-foot exaction would be proportional. And that's why, there was no objection at that point, and it was allowed. And so I think you can't look at proportional based upon the total number of acres. And the standard of proportional, and this comes out of the case law that Mr. Taylor referred to, is that the exaction must be related in nature and extent to the proposed quote-unquote development. Now, it's a stretch to call this 2.5 acre parcel development, but the exaction is not related in any way in this case to the impact of this quote-unquote development. The development or the creation of a 2.5 acre parcel isn't going to have an impact on Genoa Lane. It's not going to require additional right-of-way. It's a 70-foot right-of-way in front of that property now. 70 feet wide, and we got 28 feet paved, maybe. So I think that's how you need to look at proportional. It has to look at the nature and the extent of the exaction as related to the quote-unquote proposed development, the impact of the development. So that's the point here. Again, this map creates a single 2.5 acre parcel. The remaining 249 acres is going to remain just like it was when it was 251 acres. It's going to remain in irrigated ag land, just like the purpose of this heritage ordinance was about. So again, the exaction of over a mile of frontage totaling over an acre is not related to the impact of this quote-unquote development, the creation of a 2-acre parcel. It's not necessary, it's not required. I guess the other thing I'd point out, staff states clearly, even in their report, that the roadway is to be adequate to accommodate the traffic generated by the quote-unquote development again. Current right-of-way is 70 feet wide. The addition of a 2.5-acre parcel that might have a house on it is not going to impact that roadway and require this 10 additional feet. So again, I think you all have the discretion to determine what's proportional. And again, the proportional standard is really, if you read all that case law, it's really a reasonableness standard. What's reasonable based upon the impact of the development that's being proposed. In this case, you know, an acre plus is not a reasonable exaction. So I'd ask you to uphold the appeal and remove that condition.
Thank you very much. And it's Cavilia, is it? C-A-V-I-L-I-A?
Correct.
Thank you, Mr. Cavilia. If you could stand there maybe at the podium or be ready to resume, we'll bring it back to members of the Planning Commission. Questions for either staff or for the appellant. Sam, did you have something that you wanted to interject here?
Yeah, just a couple quick points. Again, Sam Taylor for the record, Douglas County DAs. There's two things I think the Planning Commission should bear in mind when considering this particular appeal, especially in light of Mr. Cavilia's testimony here today. One is that the board has the authority to determine under the NRS what the standards are for roads. And in this case, they have done so. They have determined that the standard for the road should be 80 feet wide. They have made it to be a rural collector road, and the standard for that particular road is 80 feet wide, and they knew that when they made that designation. And then also something else I think bears sort of remembering here and keeping in mind is that, you know, Mr. Cavilia pointed out that, you know, you can't imagine, you know, the road being 80 feet wide, Genoa Lane, you know, at any point in time, but I'm sure that was the case for 395 when it was a 1-lane road. There were folks who couldn't imagine it being a 4-lane road. So, you know, what happens over time is exactions occur, roads are widened, you know, population increases, the needs are increased, and you don't plan for today, you plan for tomorrow. And the board has already planned for tomorrow, and part of that plan is to make sure that the road is 80 feet wide. Thank you.
Thank you, Sam.
Mr. Chairman, may I respond to that just quickly?
Yes, Mr. Cavilia, go ahead.
With respect to the county having the right to set the standards and the width of roads, nobody's arguing that. Of course, the county commission has the right to decide how wide roads can be. But you can't exact from a property owner more than the impact of the development. It has to be proportional. So certainly the county has the right to make that road 80 feet wide, but they also have the obligation to pay for it when it comes time to make it 80 foot wide. They don't have the right to make somebody who's developing a 2.5-acre parcel dedicate an acre for a roadway that is great for the whole community. It's got to be proportional to the development, and that's what the case law says.
Thank you very much. Let's come back to members of the Planning Commission. Nick and Christie, we don't want to exclude you, so please, I can't really see that you're raising your hand. If you can just interject at any point, but Bryce and Mark, I think, have comments or questions that they'd like to make first.
Yep.
Go ahead, Bryce.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Lucille or Jeremy, with respect to the other dedicated right-of-ways there, were any of those similar to this particular applicant where, in this case, 2.5 acres is being developed? Or were those entire developments, or what were the circumstances surrounding those?
Jeremy Hutchings for the record with Douglas County. Yeah, Bryce, I know on the north end, that was a division of land into large parcels, so that was similar. But again, it's not 2.5 acres of development, that's a misnomer. The development's 250 acres. That's what we're splitting. So Lucille's point about it being less than half an acre, or less than 0.5% of that land area is correct. You're getting 2 parcels. I mean, and I know it seems that he's just building his house there, but the development is 250 acres right now, 252. But to answer your question specifically, I believe the north side of Genoa Lane, where we county extracted 10 feet, was division of land in large parcels. I'm not as familiar with the hut project. Lucille, do you have any additional background on huts development?
I do not have, Lucille Rayo for the record, I do not have additional information other than the map we provided. We can go back to that.
Does look like it's a land division application.
So this one is 13, 16, how many, 16 parcels? Looks like 16 parcels. That was the Settlemyer one. And then the hut one, I'll have to look in the staff reports, just hold on.
Mr. Chairman, I'm okay if they get back to me on that.
Yeah, I
Mr.
think it's
Hutchins, I'm
just
not
two
suggesting-
parcels, but go ahead with your question, Bryce.
Yeah, I'm not suggesting that I agree either way, that the development is 2.5 or 150 or what have you. I'm just trying to get a perspective on the other land development applications in the area, just so I can have some context.
Mr.
Thank-
Chairman,
thank you, Bryce.
Can I just add to that? Just
Yes, Mr.
briefly,
Cavilla, go ahead.
Because the one on the other side of Genoa Lane was the same property owner, and those 16 parcels. That's a significant number of parcels. It could be potentially a more significant impact. That's why the 10 feet is proportional. Seems reasonable. The other one, 2 parcels, but we're talking about 740 something feet of frontage. 740 feet. We're talking about almost 9 times that amount of frontage being requested here for this 2.5 acre parcel. So again, is it proportional to the development? That's the question.
Thank you. Mark?
Yeah, so Sam Taylor, is there a definition of development? I mean, to me, one house and let's remember, this is over 1,000 acre ranch. He's only showing us 250 acres, but one house on a very large ranch doesn't seem like development, in my opinion, unless there's a different definition.
Development is defined. It would take me a couple minutes to locate that for you if you really need it.
Actually, Sam, I have it.
Oh, there you
So,
go. Well,
Mark, just to read development, thanks to Natalia for sending me some definitions. Appendix A, development, the placement or erection of any solid material or structure, discharge or disposal of any dredged material or gaseous liquid, solid or thermal waste, grading, removing, dredging, or mining or extraction of any soil or materials, change in the density or intensity of use of land, including but not limited to any other division of land, is development.
Brian, go ahead.
So when we say there's 2 parcels and we're creating 2, how many extra are there?
We start with the parent parcel, and then after this, the division of the 2, the parent into 2. So you have the parent, and then with the final map, we have the 200 plus acre and the 2.5 acre.
So we create
we'll
a
have-
-1 to create a +2. So what I'm seeing here is that we have an existing land bunch. Could be 1,000, could be 1,000,000 acres. We cut off 2.5 acres. We now have 2 parcels that started from 1. This parcel never changed. And your definition of development is the erection of a structure. There is no development on the original land if they are not changing anything on that land. You then mentioned earlier that we do not have any plans for Genoa Lane. Sounds like the fences and everything that exists on that road stay the same, nothing changes. So I'm still having trouble with applying development to the vacant parcel that already exists, was pre-code of the 80 feet, and in any other application where you're the code, you're exempted. And so I'm having trouble where we apply development to the other acreage that is there with your definition of erecting structures, changing of, I can't exactly repeat it.
Let me just repeat the last sentence in the definition of development, Brian, because I know it gets into gaseous liquids and like who the heck knows, right? Change in the density or intensity of use of land, including but not limited to any other division of land. So by definition, this is development. You're starting with one large parcel, 1,000 or a million, as you said, and you're ending up with 2 parcels. That's development. You're dividing the land. It meets, there's no real, it's not ambiguous there. I can't say it any cleaner than that, I'm afraid.
And I guess my problem goes back to what they say is the heritage parcel. You know, as the Planning Commission and as the board, the heritage parcel portion of the code was created with an exemption in mind to help allow these people to survive and continue to maintain the land that they do. Now we have something that is meant to maintain the land as is, yet we have something that says that if the person does what's meant to maintain the land as is, we now have 2 conflicting statements because the other code says you need to dedicate the right-of-way. So I don't know that this makes the heritage parcel, if we make this comparison here to a large development or a large land division to a heritage parcel, that we do have similar properties making a similar request. You know, I'm hesitant when the county says we and we need, and because we wrote the rule, I mean, that sounds so terrible. But when we look at it from that perspective of, you know, we have the large parcel, I still can't find myself defining development just because land that was simply there, already exempted, now becomes non-exempted because 2.5 acres is developed. I mean, I'm looking at the proportion and I can understand the 2.5 acres getting an extra 10 feet and any other time he makes a division, that happening. But with just the 2.5 acres, I'm having a real hard time making proportional comparisons to those properties around it. Just, that's a comment, not a.
Thank you, Brian. Nick or Christy, did you have anything you wanted to ask or interject at this point?
Christy Kendall for the record. My only question was going along the same lines of Bryce's question, if we were able to get clarity on that.
Thank you, Christy. Nick, did you want to jump in at this point?
Yeah, I think I think that Bryce's question is important to not only the proportionality issue, but the precedence issue. I mean, it's clear that staff has shown that there is precedence for exaction if land is being developed. But the question is, we have to look at those situations where that land has been divided and parceled in order to make a judgment about, is this indeed proportional? So in the diagram that's shown here of LDA 06, you're dividing property into 16 parcels, which is significant. You're taking a large portion of land and dividing it into 16 parcels that at some point in the future, we all know will likely be subdivided further, right? Compare that situation to the situation that we're looking at now, where there really is no intention to subdivide this property significantly, but rather to take advantage of an exemption that I think everyone agrees is appropriate, that they can take a small portion of their land to build a house for a family member or whomever. So I think that really gets to the crux of the proportionality argument. And I would like to see a little bit more definition from staff about the other situations where an exaction has occurred in order to fairly balance, is the situation that we're looking at now equivalent to or proportionate to what has happened in the past? And I we've only seen one instance here where the property to the north was divided into 16 parcels. If there could be some other examples presented by staff that would show similar or different types of exactions made based on different subdivisions, that would be helpful.
Thank you, Nick. Very good questions. I think Sam Taylor or Sam Booth both have some comments that they'd like to make, and Lucille, perhaps you can jump in as well. Sam Taylor, do you want to start, and then we'll go with Sam and Lucille?
Sam Taylor again, Douglas County DAs for the record. It's my understanding that the parcel was divided into 16 lots. The previous one is, I forget what it is, LDA 05064. That particular one, I think, involved also roughly the same size in terms of the overall acreage. It was around 200 acres, I think. Was it less? It was more. Okay.
700.
I'm sorry, 700 acres. I'm sorry. My point being is that when you're looking at that and you're looking at the percentage, there is no hard, fast rule. There is no, well, in this case, we're going to take, certain percentage of this overall application or applicant's parcel, and in this case, we're going to take, X amount of this person's parcel. The problem is development doesn't happen that way. It doesn't happen in a uniform, equal sort of basis. You have to take what you have before you and then try to basically make sure that the standards in relation to the division of land are being adhered to. One of those standards in relation to the division of land is that the road width is appropriate. In this case, again, going back to the board has made a determination that the 80-foot roadway is what is appropriate. I'd also note that Mr. Camellia noted that previously, that there was proportionality and they were okay with that. Unfortunately, I'd just like to note for the record that they actually did, in fact, appeal the proportionality of that particular exaction for DA 05064. So that was also appealed, and the board denied that appeal. So I just wanted to note that for the record. And then also, I think Mr. Booth has additional examples of exactions of similar size and scope and nature.
Go ahead, Sam Booth.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Sam Booth, Deputy Director of Community Development. I just wanted to circle back and get some answers to a few questions. Mark, I know a few minutes ago you asked about that eligibility requirement just for this section of code. Lucille was correct, it's 5 years. So for the division of land for the 2 to 5 acre parceling, which is the provisions that this fell under, the property owner has to own the property for more than 5 years. Maybe that was 10 years in the past, but at least the code language today is 5 years. Bryce, you had asked about the Hutt map to the west. Both the Hutt map and the Settlemyre map that we're talking about across the street were both division of land into large parcels. And I think that's an important point to discuss the difference between a division of land of large parcels and a parcel map or a subdivision map. NRS, as well as the county code, describes division of land of large parcels was, there's an avenue in the NRS and in the county code to allow more quickly subdividing your larger pieces of land, 40 acres or more, and without all of the requirements that we typically hit a regular subdivision or parcel map with. So a division of land of large parcels is just an administrative process for the approval. Typically, we don't require any construction of roads or installation of utilities to those because, again, these are sections or quarter sections that are being split. And in this case, I think maybe I heard the applicant say that it was around 700 acres. That makes sense, at least 16 parcels, 40 acres in size. So they were just dividing up that property, maybe for estate purposes or for future planning purposes. But I believe that the NRS and the county code make a distinction between division of land for large parcels, being those 40 acres or larger, that it's not anticipated that there's going to be current development on a 40-acre parcel. The intention was that it was going to remain as agricultural property. That's the same case for the two-lot split to the west, the Hutt property. So that was a division of land of large parcels. So it was two 40-acre parcels being split, 80 acres total. Again, if you look at that map, and Lucille had a good call out there, it showed an existing house, showed an existing barn. I don't believe they were proposing construction with that map, but they were subdividing, for whatever reason, two 40-acre pieces. Again, could have been estate purposes or just, future planning down the road. But it is a streamlined process to get that approved. When staff is reviewing in the administrative hearing panel a parcel map, the county code describes in NRS as well, a parcel map is a separate process from a subdivision map, in that anytime you have 4 lots or less, that's a parcel map. And our county code describes that the director has the discretion to make the call on those parcel map approvals. Well, the director has appointed the administrative hearing panel, and that's a member of building, planning, and engineering that sit on that panel. But as the administrative hearing panel is reviewing parcel maps, and as we're reviewing those applications, whether or not to accept them, the code defines that we have to review a parcel map against the same provisions as a subdivision map. So we have to hold them against the same standards. And so if we believe that there's, for some reason, they are trying to avoid the provisions of a subdivision map, then staff must refer that to the Planning Commission to hear that case, and on up to the Board of Commissioners to hear that case. So I guess the distinction I'm trying to say there is that we're looking at this as a parcel map, and we understand that this is just one, at least what's being developed there is a 2.5 acre parcel. But we have to review it against the same provisions as a subdivision map. And to the question I think Nick had raised about what are the other situations or instances where you've required that, well, that's almost certainly every subdivision map that we review. Jeremy and his team in the engineering department are looking at what roads must be dedicated, what utility easements must be dedicated and recorded, and what infrastructure and improvements must be put in. So there's, with this map, there's no infrastructure or improvements that are being required, but that, as Jeremy has described, it's the right-of-way that the county's trying to get there. So again, I think staff is trying to look at this, similar, it's the same codes that we're reviewing against the subdivision map, and I do think it's a little bit different from the divisional land large parcels.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Sam Taylor, and then we'll come back to Brian. I think he had something he wanted to interject, but go ahead, Sam Taylor.
Yeah, I just had one additional point, Sam Taylor, and Douglas County DAs for the record. It goes to sort of Brian's earlier comment about the intent relative to these heritage parcels. I mean, I understand, the intent that he described, and I think that's actually correct. But the one thing that I think we need to bear in mind is that the heritage parcels were not exempted under the code to meet the other applicable county standards, including roads, sewer, water, all the other standards that they must meet in order to be subdivided. So those standards could have been exempted by the board, but they were not. So the width of roads adjacent to these parcels was basically, it's the same standard as, for example, what Sam Booth described relative to a subdivision for 4 parcels or for a large subdivision. The same standard applies in all cases, and that would include the heritage parcels. So it's just important to keep that in the back of your head.
Thank you. Brian, go ahead, and then if Lucille or Jeremy wants to add, and then we'll go back to the appellant.
So, I think we kind of narrowed our scope in our research, once again, because, when we look at just the division of parcels on one road versus the county, we have a heritage parcel, they're making this under the heritage parcel. So do we have any exaction statistics from a prior heritage parcel coming before this planning commission?
Mr. Chair, Sam Taylor again, Douglas County DAs. I think that'd be something we'd have to come back and answer at another meeting. I don't think we can answer this here on the fly.
So again, we've not done research that's appropriate for the project as a county. That's the reason the 7 of us sit here, is because you guys are on the inside looking at what you know, And I did an independent review for a client the other day. The reason you guys are doing the project and having us review it is because we are not a part of this project. We see the outside things like this that may not need to be in this type of analysis. And so when I'm looking at exactions and we're comparing large developed parcels to this heritage one, I would have loved to see a statistic of how many exactions we've done on heritage parcels. Because again, going back to our other one in Lake Ridge, how did the guy in 1950 know that the guy in 2020 with a cell phone and power windows, what he was going to know? So if we've never had this come before the code and we've never had this issue between these two separate codes maybe conflicting with each other in front of us, I think it's our job today to make the assessment of how those codes are conflicting and whether or not there is some ramifications of the conflicting codes. And I'm thinking here that I see 700 acres divided into 16 parcels having almost the same amount of right-of-way requested as one additional parcel, which is 2 parcels on 200 acres. And so when I'm looking at a proportional argument, I can't find proportion in those figures, but if I had an exaction from a heritage parcel prior, maybe I can make that connection.
Bryce, did you have something you wanted to add before we go back to staff or the appellant?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate Mr. Taylor and Mr. Booth's information because it's very helpful, but I don't think this is about roadways. I think this is about proportionality. And when we look at the Dolan versus City of Tigard U.S. Supreme Court case, it stated that with respect to exactions, no precise mathematical calculation is required, but the government must make some sort of individual determination that the required exaction is related both in nature, nexus, and extent proportionality to the proposed development. And I think if we were sitting here and we had 2 opposing counsels arguing proportionality, we would have 2 very convincing arguments for either. And so that's where I'm struggling with the proportionality issue. This isn't about roads, this isn't about codes, and I respect what staff has done in following the code as they have seen it. But I think coming back to Brian's argument, this is a heritage parcel, and we're talking about the proportionality and requiring the applicant to dedicate right-of-way on an 1.5 acre piece of property for a 2.5 acre development on 250 acres of an even bigger ranch. And so I think, like everything, statutes are created, laws are created, but common sense has to prevail. And so I'm still trying to get my head around how we can substantiate proportionality in this particular case in 2.5 acres.
Thank you, Bryce. Lucille, I know you wanted to speak before. Did you have any additional information to the questions that either Mark or Brian or Bryce or Nick were raising, or Jeremy? And then we'll go back to Mr. Cavilla.
For the record, Lucille Rayo, Community Development. I do not. Sam covered a few of the items that I was going to speak on. As far as examples, I don't have them with me, Mr. Oland, but have we required dedication for ranch heritage and 2 to 5 acre parcels? Yes, it's been required with every parcel map, as Sam described. Unfortunately, I don't have examples for you. I'm sorry I failed in that, but we'd be happy to get that to you.
Jeremy, anything else to add?
Jeremy Hutchings for the record. Yeah, just to reiterate, going in reverse, I think, Bryce, just to make sure we're clear, I understand that the house is on 2.5 acres, but the parcel map, the heritage map, which there's no distinction as far as the conditions we're putting on, is 250 acres. So 0.5% of land is, I mean, I know there's no definition for proportionality, but that's what you have to keep in mind, please. The other point about Sam's point, the heritage maps don't get any special exemption from the extraction. So they consider it just like a parcel map would. And it is, speaking from an engineering point of view, it is about the future right-of-way width. I understand that you guys are focused on the proportionality, and you bring in a different perspective to it. I'm just letting you know from an engineering perspective that it's in the master transportation plan is an 80-foot minor collector. 80 feet is what we need. We only have 70. We got 10 feet from the north side. 10 feet from the south side is what comes next. That's all. That's all.
Mr.
Thank you,
Chairman,
Jeremy.
if I could just respond to that,
yes,
please.
go ahead, Bryce.
Again, Mr. Hutchins, I don't think this is about the roadways or what's required. I guess what I need to hear is, it sounds to me that you don't believe that proportionality is subjective, when it's my understanding that the Supreme Court made its case that proportionality is in fact subjective, that there is no mathematical calculation, precise mathematical calculation. So the same argument can be made that the remaining 249 acres, which is what staff is basing it on, is how you're determining what to exact, when an argument could be made on the other side that the 2.5 acres is what could be exacted. So that's the only, not even an argument, point I'm trying to make is I feel like staff is looking at it one way, which is fine, but there is no precise. That's staff's opinion of proportionality. And I just want to follow up with one more question is, in the future, if this particular landowner were to continue to develop this, would you then not, assuming that proportionality is in fact held up to say that it's based on the 2.5 acres, each time they do this, another 2.5 acres, you'll take another percentage, and another percentage, another percentage, or am I incorrect in that understanding?
Yeah, so unless the master plan changes the roadway designation, and 80 feet, I believe is one of our widest ones, we wouldn't be asking for more right-of-way in the future, because we would have 80 feet to comply with the current master, or the transportation plan for the right-of-way. The proportionality also, I'm sorry, maybe I'm not answering your question.
I think
But the other thing I was going to say, Bryce, is the parcel we're actually extracting from isn't the 2-acre parcel. It's the 240-acre parcel. So you're right. And if you're going to ask for my professional opinion on what's proportional, 0.5% of the land seems proportional.
I think you misunderstood my first question, or my last question, which was, let's assume today that we agree that proportionality is based on the 2.5. And so of the total 251 acres, a percentage of that. And so it's a minuscule amount of the roadway. However, that's 740 feet, and you take 10 feet. I don't know what the number is, but you take 10 feet. And then the applicant comes before us again and says, I want to develop another 2.5 acres. You would take another 10 feet, and then another 10 feet in perpetuity until, I'm talking about the length. I'm not talking about the width of the road. I'm talking about the length of the road. It would be along in perpetuity until the land was fully divided, and now that full section of roadway is now, that right-of-way, that 10-foot width along 740 feet would then be dedicated. Is that a correct understanding?
So, right, so I guess if we're talking about that proportionality on just the 2.5 acres, and we took 10 feet off just the frontage of the 2.5 acres, and then in 5 years, he comes in, or 3 years for the next heritage map, and we take 10 feet of just that little tiny portion, we would keep asking for it, correct? Because if we don't get it today, seems like an inefficient way to go about it, but
correct, but
that is what we would recommend for the future.
But inefficient based upon the current argument, or the current, I want to keep saying argument, but the current determination that proportionality is based on the 249 and not on the 2.5. So if it was based on the 2.5, then each time a 2.5 or any other piece of, or larger piece came before y'all, it would just keep carving that frontage out along the way. Now, could that take 50, 100 years? I mean, it could never happen if the landowner, I mean, you could have this thing going on in Genoa forever if the landowners never develop, correct?
Yeah, I can't deny that. That's correct. And I see what you're saying. Yeah, if you get 10 feet now and 10 feet on another 2.5 acres later potentially, and you're right. If you're going to apply the proportionality to just that 2.5 acres, like you said in your opening comment there, you get arguments on both sides. I just think my argument's stronger because I'm looking at it as development, and it's the whole parcel that exists today. But that's just my opinion.
Thank you, Bryce. Thank you, Jeremy. Mark, go ahead, and then I do want to give the appellant an opportunity to make additional comments.
So Jeremy, Lucille, Sam, I know you guys are just following the rules, but thankfully, that's why you have a board to appeal this to, so that we can look at it maybe from a different point of view. So I do have a question for Jeremy. So if Mr. Coker came back in 5 years and said, okay, I have 250 acres that are left, or 248, and I want to make 19-acre parcels out of that, you would have another chance at that time to grab the 10 feet, correct?
You're assuming we lose today, but yes, yes, Mr. Nindrip.
We got winners and losers.
We can all hope sometimes.
Well, that was just for some humor. But yeah, correct. If we lose today and don't get our extraction, we'll potentially get another bite at the apple. Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Jeremy. Mr. Caviglia, do you have comments that you'd like to make at this point?
Just very briefly, and I appreciate the position you're all in, and it's difficult. Now you're sitting there now as Supreme Court justices. What's proportional? What's not proportional? And that's why these decisions are difficult. I mean, it is subjective, and every case is different. But I would, and you want to go back and look at what's happened in the past. How did we treat the previous ones? Well, unless those previous ones were challenged and ultimately went to a court, and a court decided this was proportional and that wasn't proportional, then those cases don't matter. I mean, because if somebody said, okay, that 10 feet, even though it's probably not proportional to my development, I'm going to let it go because I made a business decision that I'm going to give up that 10 feet as opposed to hiring some lawyer to challenge this all the way to the Supreme Court. We don't know if that's proportional or not, but you guys have to make that first decision whether this is proportional in this case. And in this case, it's not about the number of acres. It's not whether it's 2.5 or 251 acres to make it proportional. It's what's the impact of this development. And in this case, the development is a map that's changing one 250-acre parcel into two parcels, one 249-acre parcel, one 2.5-acre parcel. What's the impact of that map? And is the dedication of an acre and a half, a mile and a half down the road, along the road, is that proportional to that map? That's the only question, and we think it's not. And we're not saying that you don't have the right to put conditions on the map, because there's 3 pages of conditions on this map. We only challenged this one. So nobody's challenging the county's authority to put conditions on a heritage map. They have that right. But we just don't think this condition's proportional. We think it goes too far.
Thank you very much, Mr. Caviglia. If I can jump in and take a crack at analyzing this a little bit further. I think you've all made very good points, and it is a struggle to deal with the 3 arguments that you've raised, and I think we can focus maybe on the proportionality. But I think the point that was made earlier about you're dividing it into one smaller portion, you're dividing the one larger property into 2, and the one smaller is the development. But you could come back again every 5 years and continue to ask for another small portion to be carved out. And I guess the question I would ask you is, at what point do you feel it would be legitimate for the county to insist upon what is code and the granting of the additional right-of-way along the entire property? Is it after you have divided it 2 times, 3 times, 4 times, 5 times, 6 times, 7 times? I mean, at some point, you have to say the property is being divided and the entire property needs to grant the right-of-way. And I think Jeremy made several good points. He said it's any other divisional land. This is a divisional land. You can't say that the divisional land has to be 5 acres or 10 acres or 20 acres or 40 acres. You're dividing the land. So I struggle with that question as to when you believe it's fair to give up the additional right-of-way that's required by code.
Yeah, the question is an exaction. You're taking somebody's land. It's not just a condition. And that's why there's a Supreme Court case that says the exaction has to be proportional to the development that you're looking at. So we can look down the future and say, at what point becomes proportional? I mean, the idea that the 2.5 acres, the strip of land in front of the parcel being created that's creating the impact, is that proportional? I'd argue that an 80-foot right-of-way for Genoa Lane is never going to be proportional, because an 80-foot right-of-way for Genoa Lane that's now 25 feet wide, I just don't see where that becomes ever necessary. And I appreciate the county adopted a master plan and a transportation plan that says that's an 80-foot right-of-way. But again, I can't predict the future, and neither can you. All we can do is answer the question in front of us, and is this exaction that's being requested proportional to this development, which is a map that creates 2 parcels?
You didn't answer my question, and then you also raised the question of the impact. And I would argue that the impact on the smaller parcel, the 2.5 acre parcel you're creating, is none. You have no impact. The county is not extracting any land whatsoever from that property. It's extracting a tiny bit over 1 acre from the 249 acres remaining. And what is the extent of the impact on that land? It's right away. It's not a taking of the land. It's not a building of something that affects your ability to graze cattle or to use the land for anything else. You have the land on the other side of Genoa Lane, where you didn't contest the 10-foot dedication. And there has been, again, I believe, no impact whatsoever. You're not even required to move a fence on that side of the land. So I know the findings and the requirements that we're asked to meet don't speak to the question of harm or impact, but from a practical matter, the county has a standard for collector roads. The county has a trails map. The county has a transportation map. All those have been in place for numerous years, and I'm struggling to find an argument that you would make that would persuade me that this is not the right thing to do from the county's best interest. Now, I always recognize that landowners have interests as well, but the county has standards, the county has code, the county has plans that have been in place, and I'm struggling to find a rebuttal to why this is not the right thing for the county to do.
All I can do is say what Someone went off. Can you hear me now? Okay. I'll say what I've said before, which is that the extraction, the taking of someone's land, and this is taking of our land, and I get from a practical matter, it's not going to change anything tomorrow. You're not going to go out there and start widening that road and moving Bob's fences and all that stuff. But it is a legal taking of their land. It's reducing the number of acres that individual or that property owner owns. So it is a taking. And it's a taking, and that's why the Supreme Court says if you're going to do that, you have to do it proportional to the impact of the quote-unquote development. In this case, the creation of 1 parcel into 2. And if the impact of that justifies the taking of 1.1 acres of land, perfectly fine, makes perfect sense. But if it's not, then you can't do it. You can't legally do it. And if the county wants that land, the county has a legal right to take everybody's land for purposes of a road. That's called eminent domain. And I know we don't like to use that word in this county, and we don't like to talk about that. But that's how government works. If it's important to the government, they should pay for it. And if it's not necessary as a result of, or reasonably necessary as a result of this development, the county shouldn't be able to extract it. And that's why we're challenging this.
I guess I'll defer to my colleagues at this point. Other questions? Brian?
So, Jeremy, you own a property here, right? Do you?
I'm sorry, do I own property?
Yes.
I own a parcel or 2 here and there.
So if I asked you for an acre of your property as a private citizen, what do you tell me?
Is the county going to allow me to get additional parcels in exchange?
You say
As part of
how
the development?
much, right? Does the county provide any money in this situation when we take this acre of land? Because we said it's our right of way through a code despite the person's land already existing. And we've just now written a rule that took somebody's 1 acre of property.
No.
Would you be okay with me taking 1 acre of your property is kind of what I'm saying.
Yeah,
If you had decided to divide it.
it's a little bit different situation though, Brian. I see a point. It's a good one. But in this case, the applicant's coming to the county asking for a division of his land. In that case, that's when the county gets to look at it and see what may be necessary for public health and safety, which is to comply with the master transportation plan and getting it. So I would be okay with that acquisition of land if that was the case, and that is the code. If the county were to come to me and just say, I need to take a couple acres to build a football stadium, then I'd expect to get compensated for that if I didn't come to them asking to subdivide the land. So there's a distinction there in that argument.
So when we say public health and safety is increased by taking 10 acres, that doesn't change. What changes the safety? Is it because the county has ownership? Now we're safer because the county owns it, not Mr. Meyer, sorry.
Yeah.
But what makes us safer? Because the county owns something versus a private citizen. I can't find, and this public safety argument's been brought up in this building many times, and yet every time there is a walk around of what's public safety. I think we've got a good example of road stays the same, yet you guys as a county are claiming public safety is increased. Tell me how that works.
Well, it works in the sense that, as Mr. Taylor pointed out, we're planning for the future. So when the county continues to grow in the future and it becomes necessary to widen the road with certain traffic volumes and speeds needs to be a certain design standard, which it's not at now. So we're looking the public safety element satisfied by looking to the future, and that's how it's answered. Not today, but again, this is the planning commission.
So looking to the future, if we put 80 feet on the left side of a property, 80 feet on the right side of the property, what happens to the guy in the middle?
The guy
He loses 10 feet.
The guy in the
Same
middle
as the
loses
people
10
as the other
feet.
people. However, the person on the other side is not dividing his property. He gets paid because the county takes it through eminent domain in which you guys pay.
Yeah, and that guy's actually not asking to divide his property either. So yeah, he would get paid. This gentleman is asking to divide the property, so he gets the benefit of an additional parcel, and that comes with certain requirements to develop. Like
So then
any
looking
project.
to the future, we're setting a precedent here possibly that the next 1,000-acre property, say with a 70-foot road, decides he wants a 2.5-acre property, his 1,000 feet now loses, acres, loses 10 feet along that roadway. We can go back to a proportional. You guys are saying it's not proportional, but you have 2 parcels created. It's the entire length of those 2 parcels. Whereas 16 parcels created was the entire length of where those parcels were created. So that is what you guys are saying is proportional. It would also be proportional in the 2.5 acres to 1,000 acres if it was 1,000 acres of frontage.
Well, actually, Brian, we're not making the proportionality argument. We're responding to the proportionality argument by Mr. Caviglia. What we're arguing is that the right-of-way width for minor arterial is 80 feet. We only have 70, we need 10. And if another development were to come in, would we ask for 10 feet? It depends. If it was a local road, not adjacent to a collector, we only need 60 feet, potentially 50 feet.
Well, I'll leave it with another analogy. You got $200, I need 100.
Mr. Chair?
Thank you, Brian. Sam Taylor.
Yes, Mr. Chair, Sam Taylor, Douglas County DA. A couple other points I think that are pertinent to this analysis, and the first being under the heritage parcel division of land, basically the applicant is not being forced to go back and get a zoning change for the parcel. I mean, as it stands right now, he would not be able to do this without the heritage parcel, so he's getting a certain benefit from the county and government for doing so. In addition, the applicant is getting a 2.5-acre parcel, which is going to be worth, $300,000 up, I would say, in that particular location, to have a lot that you can sell. That's something else that one must consider when you're determining proportionality and the impact of the project here. The county is by allowing people to do this in the way that we're doing this is giving something, but in exchange, the exaction is something in return. And that is the whole process. That is exactly how exactions work. You want to do X, well, you're going to give the county Y and Z. That's how this works. If you're going to have an impact on the county, then the county has a chance to make sure its standards are met when it comes to this particular parcel and the division of land. In addition, if you look at the overall value of the parcel as a whole, I mean, it's significant. And then adding, again, a 2.5 acre parcel, which can be sold individually, is a valuable benefit indeed, especially if you don't have to go through rezoning.
Thank you, Sam. Any other members of the Planning Commission have questions or comments that they'd like to make of staff or the applicant at this point? Christy, Nick, we could come back to you if you have anything else that you want to interject. If not, I think the next part of the process would be to allow public comment.
Kurt, I have a couple of points that I would like to ask.
Please, go ahead, Nick.
Yeah. Number one is, what are the restrictions on the landowner for coming back and creating another 2 to 5 acre parcel on this heritage property? When can they create another one of these?
Lucille, do you want to go ahead and answer that one?
For the record, Lucio Rayo, yes, so he has to wait 5 years, and then he can create another parcel. So it's 1 every 5 years, 2 every 10, 3 every 15. He has to own a minimum of 100 acres of irrigated agricultural land remaining or owning it for 3 years previous to that, 5 years previous to that. 5 years previous to that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, and then is there any restriction on him being able to sell those properties?
Lucille Rayo, for the record. No, he may sell the property, he may give it to a family member, but there are no restrictions on selling it.
So there's no restriction on that. So he could develop this property tomorrow and then sell it, put it on the market.
Lucille Rayo, yes, that is correct.
Okay, thank you. That's all the questions I have.
Thank you, Nick. Christy, anything on your end before we move to public comment?
No further questions at this time.
Thank you, Christy. Let's open it to public comment. As we have done in the past, public comment is limited to 3 minutes per person. And if you would please come to the microphone and sign in, state your name, and give your comment.
Frank Gertige for the record, Chairman Walder, members of the board. I don't think that when we worked on creating the heritage parcels and the 5 acre parcels that we could create or the 2.5 to 5 acre parcels that we could create every 5 years, that we ever envisioned that we would be having to give up other property in order to accomplish that. Certainly, the proportionality issue is something that has to be looked at. And I look at it from the perspective of we had one 251 acre lot that could be developed with one house at the time without having to go through a parcel process. Now we have created 2 lots that have the ability to be developed with one house, the 240 whatever acre parcel that's left, and the 2.5 acre parcel. Did it increase the value of the 240 acre parcel that's being the one that's basically being demanded of the property? I would suggest no, it didn't. The 2.5 acre parcel, yeah, it has a value. Sam Taylor said $300,000. So now let's look at proportionality. If he's asked to give up an acre of ground, or an acre and a half, I don't know what it is, that's $120,000 an acre. That's a pretty steep demand for a $300,000 value of the property. And I think that's what we really need to look at, because like I say, the 200-acre parcel that's left really didn't increase in value over what it was before the division. So in the end, I think the suggestion that was made by Brian, that you take and look at what the proportion of the 2.5 acres, the increased value of whatever that is, in respect to everything, and then assess the amount of right-of-way that you're going to acquire incrementally along that frontage, is where you need to go, because that's where we have to establish proportionality. With regards to Kurt, as to where we should establish proportionality rules, I think that should be established not with a large land lot division, but when that property starts getting subdivided for development at the 19-acre level or below. Thank you.
Thank you, Frank. Always nice to see you, and thank you for your contributions to the county. Additional public comment? If you could sign in and state your name, please.
Good afternoon, Chairman, Commissioners. My name is Dan St. John. I'm at 1766 Bitterbrush. I'm a 42-year, recently retired civil engineer, public works official here in northern Nevada and elsewhere. And I want to say that I really want to commend the Planning Commission. I don't think the public understands the extent to which you've got to take that macro transportation plan, the ordinance, the codes that apply throughout, and apply them to individual, I won't say small issues, but individual parcel issues, individual development issues, and try to make those interpretations that you're struggling with. I don't think the public understands the time and the thought you put into these things. So wherever this thing falls, it'll fall after considerable deliberation and work on your side, as well as staff. I have worked in public works organizations. I understand the very difficult work of staff and council in these types of situations. As I sit here today, I have no dog in the fight. I will tell you, as a professional engineer, as someone who's been dedicated to making our infrastructure better all my career, I have seen situations where good projects don't happen because of that 10-foot right-of-way was not acquired. I've seen where large projects have been significantly delayed because of right-of-way. When somebody throws out eminent domain, it's the last resort, and it is a bloody battle. And that's why the county has the codes and regulations that it has to look to the future. And 80 feet is not much for a right-of-way, folks. I mean, I've built roads. I've been involved in maintaining roads for years, and an 80-foot right-of-way, everything I've heard on the staff part, I'm sitting there going, yep, that's what we've accepted in our culture for our roads and what we believe is necessary. Yet I have a very strong appreciation for land rights and the rights of private ownership. And that's why I struggle with this proportionality issue, because there's so many ways of arguing that. So best of luck in your deliberations. I know it'll be thoughtful, and I congratulate all of you for the fine research that you've done. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Additional public comment?
Jim Slade. A bedrock principle of our country, some would say the bedrock principle, is the rule of law. The administrative hearing panel took that into account and determined that this condition should be approved. The county code states clearly, dedication of right-of-way is required with a tentative parcel map. The transportation plan is clear when it says county standards for a rural collector road is 80 feet in width. And that, of course, includes the shoulder on both sides of the road, and it is there for safety, for long-term safety. As the previous speaker just said, that's a standard type of distance for that type of road. Every development has certain requirements, and this is a development, and conditions that they must meet in order to be approved. This is a ranch heritage parcel, a 2 to 5 acre parcel. Mr. Kabili is wrong in his statement, I'm sure he was not in the room when it happened, that this was done to prevent the creation of 19-acre ranchettes. That had nothing to do with it. These types of parcels, like this 2.5 acre parcel in land, on land zoned A19, was to help our ranching community, to assist them in continuing to have viable ranching operations. I support that concept, but in return for the opportunity to provide for this sort of development of this 2.5 acre parcel in land zoned A19, there are sometimes required actions in return. This is one of those. I was a little surprised when Mr. Nedenreep asked about the ranch heritage parcels, since he and his brother did essentially the same thing just a few years ago, perhaps the first ranch heritage parcels. And they did 5 parcels at once between the two brothers. But perhaps I will give him the benefit of the doubt. His questions were somewhat rhetorical in that he wanted his fellow commissioners and the public to understand what was going on. And by the way, he complied with all the requirements for his parcels. If the applicant decides that this condition is too onerous, there's a simple solution. Withdraw your application. All development applications require certain conditions, and this is one of them. Creation of a 2.5 acre parcel will not lower the number of the division of land into large parcels that will be available, nor will it limit the number of A19 parcels that could be developed and essentially could be developed at any time. So that's not a consideration. The planning commissioners should not substitute their opinions for the rule of law. This condition of approval should be retained, and hence the appeal should be denied.
Thank you very much. Is there additional public comment?
I apologize. I'll resist the temptation of responding to all of that. I just want to, for the record, indicate that the existing parcel, there is a home on the existing parcel, and it's where the 2.5 acres is being created. It's lived in by a family member, and that's the intention. So, just for the record.
Mr. Chair?
Thank you very much. Is there additional public comment? We'll close additional public comment, and then we will move to other questions that members of the Planning Commission might have. If there's no additional public comment, then I'll close public comment. And Sam Taylor, if you have a comment that you'd like to make or clarification or explanation, please go ahead.
Yeah, this is just my last sort of hurrah here to support staff. I think it's important to keep in the back of our head that the proportionality test is applied by the Supreme Court to the entire development. And in this case, because the development is defined as the lots being parceled out, then both lots must be taken into account whenever you're determining what is proportional. It is critical to understand that. So it's not just the 2.5 acre. You don't strip out what is like, say for example, you got a large lot and then you're going to split it out and subdivide, a portion of another lot into like 10 lots. You don't just look at the 10 lots, you look at the entirety of what is being done. And in this case, the entirety of what's being done is you're creating 2 lots, and between both lots, you're in excess of 250 acres, and the proportionality argument or analysis should be applied to both lots together, and hence the proportionality examination must come to the conclusion that the percentage is less than 1%. In fact, it's less than 0.5%, I think. Correct? Okay. That's the analysis that should be employed for this particular application.
Thank you, Sam. I did have one question that I forgot to ask of Mr. Caviglia. If you don't mind returning to the microphone, and staff may want to weigh in on this as well. But Mr. Caviglia, I think you've researched this very well, and you've done a very good job in preparing your arguments. But are you aware of any examples where right-of-way has been asked for and not granted, or asked for and not given permission in previous situations throughout the county?
Not that I can think of off the top of my head. I'm sure there's some out there, but.
Thank you. Okay, we've closed public comment. We'll bring it back to members of the Planning Commission for discussion, deliberations, and then we'll try and move to a motion on this in this matter. Brian.
So this is more of a bylaw or procedural clarification. This issue's come up now twice in the last 2 meetings where the applicant has come up and responded after public comment. As I've remembered, we've always allowed that. Is that something that has changed? Because I've heard this argument twice now in 2 months, that the applicant then stood back up and said whatever he wanted. But it was my understanding the applicant gets unlimited time during these meetings.
The answer to your question, I don't think is in the bylaws per se. It would be at the discretion of the chair. I always try to be very liberal in allowing participation, whether it's from the applicant or whether it's from individual members of the public. So I apologize to anyone if they feel that my procedural rulings are not correct, but I always err on the side of allowing comments from all individuals at all times to the maximum extent possible.
And I'm not questioning your authority or anything. I just wanted to make sure that, the applicant has enough time to talk, because he ultimately has all the answers that most of us cannot answer. If we cut them off at 3 minutes, we might not get all the information we need. There was a very important piece of information there at the end that I did not read through in the beginning, that there is already a house on the 2.5 acres. The developable acreage is the 249 if the house already exists on the 2.5 acres, like you guys say, because the house could not be additionally put up on the 2.5 acres, but it would be put up on the 249. Or am I misinterpreting what I heard there? I thought I heard somebody say that there was already an existing house and a family member lives on that 2.5 acres. And so if the applicant hadn't stood up and talked, might not have ever heard that. So I appreciate allowing the applicant enough time to clarify.
Thank you. We'll go back to other members of the Planning Commission for other questions, or if we can move to concluding comments, then we can look towards the motions. Bryce, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for your patience. I heard something a minute ago that I just want to follow back up on with Mr. Taylor, because this is really important to me and having done my research on this issue. Mr. Taylor, if I heard you correctly, are you suggesting that the proportionality is not subjective because regardless of whether there's the size of the parcels being separated, if you will, that there's some law or some ruling that it is the entire parcels, whether there's 10 of them combined or whether there's 2 of them combined in this case, that it's not subjective as to whether it is the entire, multiple parcels. Did I understand that correctly?
Yes, Sam Taylor again, Douglas County DAs for the record. I would say that's correct. With respect to this particular application, yes. The court, when examining proportionality, looks at the entire development being undertaken. And that's how they've examined it in each context. The court to the best of my knowledge, has not examined lot parceling per se and whether or not something's proportional in terms of lot parceling. But under our code, it defines development as lot parceling, which Jeremy read to you earlier. So because lot parceling is considered development, and because the court looks at the entirety of the development and the impact, I would say the entirety of the development is the creation of both lots, which would include, more than 250 acres. So I'd say that for the purposes of examined proportionality, you must take a look at the entirety of both lots, because it is land subdivision. If it was building something, then you might actually look at, like, say, for example, the size of the building, the impact to the community and what have you. Are you building a big barn, to store your tractor in, or are you building multifamily dwellings with, 1,000 residents? I mean, that's what they look at whenever they're looking at, development, but it's the type of application. But in this case, the type of application before you is lot parceling.
Thank you, Sam. Other comments or questions from the members of the Planning Commission? I did want to make one small clarification or correction as we move forward to the second item that we will need to make a decision on. If you look at packet page 105, and then the same language is repeated on package page 108, it's item 2B. We have two options, A and B, and 2B I think is incorrectly worded. It says find that the findings of fact required, and it should be to approve the conditions applied to tentative map application DP 210141 cannot be made, and therefore may deny staff's condition B1. And that's also on page 108. And I think, Lucille, if you, at the appropriate time, will have the options there, you've got that appropriate there. So the two options would be the first one, deny, or second, grant. You can use it in that language if people want to read off of that. So I would like to make one other quick comment, and then if people want to make a motion, they can do that. If people want to debate the issue further, we can do it at this point or after a motion is made. I did look at the trails plan. I think this was an important part of the argument that the appellant made based on the fact that they didn't believe that the trails plan should be operative. But the trails plan from 2003, page 51, section 10.24.03.5 says, through the development review process, the county shall require any proposed development adjacent to a proposed bikeway or trail on the adopted comprehensive trail plan to participate in facility development. And this portion of Genoa land is designated as a proposed bikeway. So I think that's another important factor that should be applied to the decision that we make today. So having said that, again, other comments from the members of the Planning Commission, or if anyone is prepared to make a motion, we can go with a motion and then debate it afterwards. Bryce.
I'd like to make a motion.
Bryce had a quick comment maybe, or if he was making a motion, I'll... Okay. Go ahead, Bryce.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just have a comment. First of all, I want to be clear before we leave here today that I appreciate staff's work on this. I think our job is to look at this from a number of different ways, from unbiased perspectives, and I think both from the legal analysis and from the engineering and planning analysis, I want to commend you for the work that you've done, because these are difficult, and codes and ordinances have unintended and intended consequences. And for me, this one's a difficult one, because I think one of the unintended consequences, or maybe it was even intended, is the potential overreach, if you will, of government's authority and a landowner, a rancher in this community for more than 100 years who simply wants to carve out 2.5 acres of land, and all of a sudden, now he's got to dedicate 740 feet of roadway based upon the code. So this has been a difficult one for me to get my head around today.
Thank you, Bryce. Mark?
Yes. So Since I was around when we created this 2 to 5 acre parcels, and believe me, we had to do this twice because the first time somehow the meaning got lost. But the ranchers give a lot to this community. They provide all the green grass that everybody likes to look at. They have the cows out there. They do flood control by opening up all of their diversions when we have a flood to help spread out the water, slow down the flow. They help with aquifer recharge. And part of this discussion, when this first started, was when we have landowners that have been here for a significant amount of time, that have a very large holding of land, this was kind of a rent that the county was paying by allowing the landowner to create a 2 acre parcel every 5 years because they weren't getting anything else. We have to all remember that back in the 80s, all of the valley was zoned 1 house per 1 acre. That has subsequently changed to 1 house per 19 acres. But this 2 acre parcel is very near and dear to all of the large landowners' hearts. And I think that this is something that, if at all we can find to help out the rancher, this is something that I'm always going to do. So thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Brian?
So I like the way Bryce put it, that there's unintended consequences possibly from each decision. So, typically that's what I'm looking for in any application that comes before us. What are the unintended consequences? We put in the seatbelt laws, more accidents. Yes, less people may have died in percentage, however, more people actually died. So, when I'm looking at this from, unintended consequences, I go back to what Mr. Frank Gerticke says and what Mr. Nedenrip is saying right here is, this makes it so that they would like to divide into 40 acre parcels as opposed to cut out one 2 to 5 acre parcel. So we as a county have just created the ability and the want of the ranchers to divide this 200 acre property, into a minimum of 5 or 6 parcels as opposed to 2. So we are creating a possible negative consequence in a sense that the next landowner who has to dedicate that 10 feet, that 1 acre, instead comes together with 6 parcels. We get 6 homes. We then subdivide to 19. So, if we look how this rolls down the road, we are preventing a code provision that sucks out one 2 to 5 acre parcel. And when we're creating conflicting codes, I don't look to, see who's the better code. I look to see what's the consequences of each. And I see, the possible consequence that we make the ranchers want to just subdivide every large land holding into 40 acres is a possible very negative unintended consequence here. And that's the thing I have trouble wrestling with.
Thank you, Brian. Nick, I know you wanted to make a motion. You can go ahead and do that now if you wanted to make other comments. But please, the floor is yours.
First, I want to commend staff for following the code. I know it's a difficult decision, but the code is the code. And, this is a collector road, and it's been designated in the master plan. So I would like to make a motion to deny the appeal by finding that there was a sufficient basis to uphold condition B.1.A for development application DP 21-0141, which states the applicant shall dedicate 10 feet of public right-of-way to Douglas County along their property line fronting Genoa Lane, State Route 206, as shown on the tentative map.
Thank you, Nick. You've made a motion to deny the appeal. Is there a second to the motion? I will second your motion, Nick. So the motion is to deny the appeal, and we will now have a period of debate. Nick, as the maker of the motion, you have the right to advocate in behalf of your motion first, and then we'll move to other members of the Planning Commission.
Okay. I believe, unfortunately, this particular landowner has property along a collector route. Had they not been on a collector route, I don't think that this would be an issue. However, they are on a collector route. This is code. They are getting compensated for this because not only can they build on this 2.5 acre property, but they can sell it immediately. 5 years from now, they can build another 2.5 acre property and sell that immediately. So there is compensation by the county in that the landowner is able to sell those properties. And in return for that, we are going to ask for a 10-foot extraction from their property for future use. So I believe that the compensation is appropriate. And I believe because the property is situated on a collector route, that it is appropriate.
Thank you very much, Nick. Is there anyone who would like to speak in opposition to the motion? Bryce.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't think this has anything to do with compensation. And so, although I respect my colleague, compensation, we don't discuss compensation anywhere in here. Compensation is not in the code. I think this comes down to common sense and the fact that, you know, as a planning commission, we are constantly reviewing codes that you know, are outdated, or you know, maybe they were written for a large particular group, but there's always exceptions, and I think in this particular case, you know, what is being asked of the landowner is egregious, in my opinion, and I still have not been convinced, or that the proportionality isn't subjective, and so I can't support denying the appeal simply because you know, one side or the other opinion, and this is about opinion for me. This is about one opinion, whether, you know, it could be legal or non-legal, but this is about an opinion. And it is my opinion that the appellant has standing, and therefore, you know, I won't vote for the denial.
Thank you very much, Bryce. Mark.
Yes, so I echo what Bryce says, but I also want to remind my other fellow planning commissioners that, as Jeremy Hutchings clearly said, the county will get another bite at this apple should Mr. Coker decide to more intensely develop this property and cut it down into 19-acre parcels. Then, yes, absolutely, at that point, I think that the county should follow its rules and has the right. But at this point, I don't think that it's appropriate, and I think it's a little overreaching for one house.
Thank you very much. Brian?
You know, so when I look at the map and I look at the area across the road, I look at an area of cross on the other side of the road, and I kind of wonder, how'd the road get there in the first place? Obviously, that landowner had to have given that up. So to then go to the counter landowner who gave up the land to the county in the first place and say, no, we created a new rule, you give us more, you know, kind of conflicts with me initially, along with my many other comments, you know, about unintended consequences. I look at 700 acres that got 1.1 acres taken from it, and we're taking 1 acre from 250 acres. To me, if we go proportional just based off that on the exact same landowner, we take 1/3 of what we're taking today. And therefore, I can't agree with the denial of this approval.
Thank you, Brian. I seconded Nick's motion. I agree with what the staff has done. The points that each of you have made are excellent. I think you've thought this through very carefully, and we can agree to disagree. I think Mr. St. John in public comment made a very good observation. We need to look to the future. I also think it's important to note that there have been no examples cited where the county has not received right-of-way in areas where land is developed. Brian, you make some very good points. It's the geography of the frontage that seems to kind of be in question. If this property were 250 acres, but it only had maybe 40 feet of frontage, I think the county's position would be the same. It would be that all of the frontage on Genoa should be allowed the right-of-way. So I do find that it's proportional, because we have to look at it's not just it's the frontage land that exists. It's not just the total acreage. So I think that's an important consideration. And I guess I would go back to the statement in our packet on packet page 108 that says right-of-way dedications have historically been used by the county at the time of development for the purpose of bringing projects into compliance with current standards. And it goes on to say this was the case in the existing properties along the same area. The property that was dedicated on the north side by the settle miners, and the hut property was developed on the south side of Genoa. So I think the precedents are there. I think we do need to follow code, and I support Nick's motion. Christie, if you have comments, we'll be happy to hear them now. If not, we can ask for other comments from members of the Planning Commission, or we can go to a vote.
Yeah, Christy Kendall for the record. Pretty torn on this one. I think that the dedications are a very common thing in development, and a tool that is used by the agencies to improve the roads and to plan for the future. At the same time, the scale at which this is asked for the type of proposed development, and knowing that any future development of the larger parcel would come back in front, would result in the dedication at that point in time. I'm very torn on this one. I think Bryce made a pretty good point. I think I'd have to lean towards not agreeing with the motion.
Thank you, Christie. If there are no other concluding comments by members of the Planning Commission, then we'll proceed to a vote. And once again, this is Nick's motion to deny the appeal by finding there was a sufficient basis to uphold condition B1A. Does anyone need clarification on the motion? Okay. I will call the roll on this one. Nick, are you in favor or opposed to the motion?
I'm in favor.
Nick votes aye. Christie?
Opposed.
Nay. Bryce?
Nay.
Mark?
Nay.
Brian?
Nay.
And the chair votes aye. So in this, there are 2 votes aye and 4 votes nay, and the motion is not agreed to. Sam Taylor, I guess we would probably prefer to have a second motion that would be the granting of the appeal to make this official. So if there's a member who would care to make the motion to grant the appeal, we'll entertain that at this point.
I'll make a motion that we grant the appeal on the grounds that the conditions B1A relative to the tentative map application DP 21-0141 cannot be sustained.
Mark makes the motion to grant the appeal. Is there a second?
I'll second that motion.
Brian seconds the motion. Is there any further debate on this motion? Bryce?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One question that I realized I don't think we ever got answered. Maybe Jeremy or Lucille can help. In the approval of the appeal, would the county still require, would this take away any right-of-way dedication at all, or would there still be, the buzzword of the day, a proportionate amount of right-of-way?
So Jeremy Hutchings, from the record, the way I understand it, and Lucille can correct me, what that last vote has done is there will be no right-of-way extraction. So to get a second bite of the apple, as Mr. Nendrup has said, would only apply to the remainder parent parcel, and the amount of frontage on the 2-acre parcel will always be a 70-foot right-of-way unless the county enforces eminent domain at this point. So that provides a pretty messy issue for staff in the future, but understanding and respecting the board's wishes, that's what's happened. And as far as I understand what's happened, so you have a 70-foot chunk, and then presumably if they do 19-acre parcels in the future, when you get 10 more feet, then it'll go to 80. But that existing 2-acre parcel will always be a 70-foot right-of-way width there. Does that answer your question?
Thank you. Thank you.
Go ahead, Bryce.
It does. I guess I'm wondering is the point I was trying to make, and to me, because my position throughout this whole thing has been proportionality, that what I would like to see, if it's possible, is if 2.5 acres represents 10% of frontage, if you will, that 10% of the 740 feet be dedicated right away. Now, I don't know if that, and Mr. Taylor, I don't know if that's something that we can put as a condition.
In this particular case, the motion would need to include that as a condition, but because the AHP approved it, and because this is an appeal, and you're just deciding whether or not the appeal is to be granted, and because the 2.5 acre is not adjacent to the roadway, there can be no exaction relative to the 2.5 acre parcel. So the parent parcel, basically, because it fronts the entire roadway, there would be zero exaction if you approved the appeal.
Okay, well, I think that makes my point that I've been banging all day long, is that particular parcel really has nothing to do with the extraction. Okay, thank you.
Brian?
Point of clarification on that. Jeremy, how much of is it a driveway that I'd assume gets them to this house? Because if they have no frontage, how do they get to the house? I want to know where exactly they connect.
Yeah, and perhaps Jeremy Hutchings, Director, Lucille's reminding me of that parcel. It looks like it's a private driveway
For the
easement.
record.
So potentially we could get another second bite of the apple. It's not going to have that little chunk. That's the parcel map, right, Lucille? Yeah,
So
it's a
basically like the driveway
Private driveway
with-
easement.
Yeah.
Private driveway easement.
Any other points of clarification on the motion or discussion? Bryce?
Oh, boy. So my understanding now is that, because I had asked this question earlier, that if the landowner, if the applicant comes back and does a 2.5, and then another 2.5, and another 2.5, then at some point, assuming that 100 times equaled the full 250 acres, and now it worked out perfect, we would never get the right-of-way on that particular land, correct? I don't know.
Well, you can't divide it down less than 100 acres, so you could continue doing the 2.5 every 5 years until you got to 100 acres, and then you stop. And conceivably, they could do the same 2.5 along the same driveway, so they would never affect the frontage, or they could do another driveway and do it on the back of the property, so it would never be dealing with the frontage. But that's
Mr. Chair,
the
I think I
predicament.
can help.
Sam Taylor.
Yes. Basically, you only get to do heritage parcels 3 times. So you get 3 lots. That's the whole purpose, is assuming you have 3 kids, right?
May I interrupt, Chairman? Sam, you can do it so if he does this one, he can come back and do one 5 years later.
That's correct, yes.
Yeah, so,
Yeah, you don't just get to do it once. I mean, what I meant was you get to do up to 3. So
Well,
you can do 15
one-
every can do 3 every 15 years, 2 every 10 years, or 1 every 5 years. That's how it works.
Right, so we'd
Right,
have
but that is-
150 acres times divided by 2 and 5 years, you know.
Right, but here's something else you got to keep in mind, though. It isn't necessarily that they're going to put the 2.5 acre parcels each time adjacent to the roadway. So if you're using the location of the parcels and where they're being created as a tool for exaction, then that might be problematic in the future as well, because my guess is they would probably be all towards the back of the property, given where the current house is. I mean, I don't know. I mean, that's very speculative on my part, but.
Mark?
So Sam, could I amend the motion to take the 10-foot easement across his private driveway?
Sam Taylor again for the record, Douglas County DAs. Normally, a board can condition an application, or the planning commission can condition that, but in this case, because you're hearing an appeal, you can grant the appeal, you can deny the appeal, or you can modify the appeal. So I would say, yes, you could potentially modify the appeal. I mean, you have, the planning commission has that inherent authority. So whenever you're hearing appeals, you can grant the appeal, deny the appeal, or modify it. So in this case, I would say you could, yes, modify the appeal to take 10 foot adjacent to the roadway where the driveway is, yes.
Go ahead, Mark. I might suggest we take a brief recess to consult with staff, but go ahead if you had other comments you wanted to interject.
No, I was ready to modify my motion, but if we want to take a recess and listen to staff, then I follow your lead.
Yeah, I'd like to take a 10-minute recess then, and we'll come back at approximately 3:21. Thank you. I'll call the meeting back to order. I think Mark will be returning in just a minute. If I can confirm, Nick, that you're still with us, and Christy, that you can still participate in the deliberations and the action?
Yes, Christy Kendall's here.
Yep, I'm here.
Thank you very much, Nick. Mark is with us, so we have all 6 members, a quorum. And I'll summarize where we were at, and then we'll conclude this action. Mark was asking about modifying his motion to contain language that would deal with the right-of-way, and I wanted to make sure with legal counsel that we were following all the appropriate rules and not exceeding our authority. So at this point, I will ask Sam Taylor to read the section of code that would be applicable, and then we'll continue with our actions. Go ahead, Sam.
Yes, Mr. Chair, Sam Taylor, Douglas County DAs, for the record. The section of code that's applicable that allows you to modify the motion comes from 2028-020 subsection E, which states, the appellate body may affirm, reverse, or modify only those items raised in the appeal. In this particular appeal, the item that was raised is condition B1A, which relates directly to the dedication of right-of-way. Hence, the Planning Commission may modify the amount of property that's been exacted in this particular case. So in other words, if you want it to be 20 feet, 100 feet, 200 feet, whatever, you can make any modifications you deem appropriate.
Thank you very much, Sam. Any questions of Sam Taylor on how we can proceed at this point? Bryce?
Mr. Chairman, I don't have a question for Sam. I just want to, if it's appropriate to make a comment or ask a question at this time prior to moving forward. So during the break, I had an opportunity to consult with counsel and with Mr. Hutchins regarding the future. And the thing that I want to make clear is that my intention is to not hurt the ranchers in our community, not hurt the landowners. I said it the day that I went before the body to be, before the board to be a planning commissioner, that I would work to support the rural nature of Douglas County, and I'm committed to that. As well as sustainable growth. And so those are, I look to those two things every time I sit up here and trying to make the right decisions. And so the question that I had asked earlier is, if over the course of time, the landowner did 2.5, 2.5, 2.5, 2.5, so forth, every 5 years in perpetuity, that if we were to accept the appeal today at its face value, then the next time one could say, well, it's the same situation. And so we may never get to the point where the county's ever able to have any right-of-way. And so the question I had, and what I consider to be a compromise, is if 2.5 acres represents a certain percentage of that parcel, the overall parcel, then a certain percentage of that right-of-way should be dedicated, and so forth and so on. And so I share that with my colleagues, because that's a little bit of a game changer for me in trying to make sure that I do what I believe is right for the landowner and what is right for the county.
Thank you, Bryce. Brian?
Mr. Chairman, can I respond to that?
Sure, Nick, go ahead, and then Brian wants to jump in.
Sam Taylor, correct me if I'm wrong, but the landowner can only do 3 parcels total over a period of 15 years. Is that correct?
Actually, they can go down to 100 acres. So,
They can go down to 100 acres.
They can go, yeah. In this case, I think 251 acres. So if they're taking 2.5 acre parcel every 5 years, I mean, I don't know what the math is, but eventually you'll get there. It just takes a while. What's that?
So there is no limit on that. There is no limit on that.
Yeah, 150 years. Thank you. That's right. So, but you can do larger parcels too. So it's just a question when you get down to the 100 acres. That you can't go below 100 acres is what I'm trying to say, Nick.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you, Sam Taylor. Brian?
So I do appreciate what Bryce is saying because, I'm a math person, proportionality was speaking to numbers to me. And when I look at it as we have an acre of right of way, and if we're taking away, like Bryce says, say it's 10%, 2.5 of 250 to be simple, 10% of that right of way, in a mathematical sense seems to make sense. When I'm looking at from that stance, eventually he could do, some other 2.5 acres parcels, but at 10 of them, the entire right of way is there. Maybe it's not, you're pointing out it's not 10%, 1%, but, I was just making a simple, comparison, not for actual statistics. So, that's why we use calculators. But, I am amenable to removing my second of Mark's original motion if that's the intent of Mark.
Mark, if we can bring it back to you, you can modify your motion with the consent of the second, or you can withdraw and then we'll start over again.
So I'd like to modify my motion so that the 25-foot private driveway that is being created for this 2.5 acre parcel, that the landowner must give the 10-foot right-of-way across that 25-foot private driveway at this time.
Thank you, Mark. Mark is modifying his motion to include a 25-foot right-of-way covering the driveway of the affected property. Brian, would you agree to that friendly amendment?
I mean, I almost just said what I would agree to, but, when I look at it from what's actually being, frontaged, Mark is correct that the only portion frontage is that, I don't know if I can agree to only take the 10 feet because then I think we're going proportionality, slanting towards the other side in that respect. So, it's 10 feet, 1%, as Kirk put out, of the total frontage. I can't say that. I'm not exactly on statistics on that exact, how much an acre is in frontage distance. So I think I can agree. I do agree, and I second the motion to take the 10 feet because I think the application of the percentage might be more difficult.
Mr. Chair, if I may.
Sam Taylor.
I think it would be helpful if we could perhaps get the applicant's attorney to weigh in whether or not he thinks that that is amenable to his client.
Yes, thank you. Mr. Caviglia, if you could comment on Mark's modification of his motion.
For the record, the property owner is in agreement with the modified motion, and we accept that condition.
Thank you. Is there any discussion or debate on the modified motion? Bryce.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So if I understand, this will be directly frontage to that 2.5 acre parcel and would not achieve the county's objective of the frontage along Genoa, correct?
Jeremy, do you want to try and answer that? I think the answer is, go ahead, Jeremy.
Yeah, I think what, Jeremy Hutchings again for the record, Bryce, I think what Kent Nendrip there, Mark was saying is he's going to dedicate 10 foot of right-of-way along the private driveway access, which is 25 feet in width of frontage along Genoa Lane. Is that right? So just where that driveway comes out, about 25 feet wide, we'll take 10. And then the rest as you go west to Genoa will still remain with the parent parcel. So we'll have a full 80-foot width right there at that 25-foot driveway access. Does that make sense?
Thank you.
Thank you, Bryce. Thank you, Jeremy. Further discussion or clarification of the motion that is before us now? Seeing none, then I'll call for a vote on the motion that Mark has made as modified, and we can do a roll call on this as well.
Excuse me.
Christy, do you have a question?
Yeah, can you reread the current motion that's on the table?
I can go ahead, or Mark, do you want to, did you have what written down? Go ahead.
No, but I will be glad to redo the motion and include the modification. So I would like to grant the appeal on the grounds that the conditions in B1A relative to the tentative map application DP 21-0141 cannot be sustained except for the 10-foot dedication of a right-of-way across the 25-foot private drive that is accessing Genoa Lane.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Sam Taylor.
Yeah, I don't think that's the correct format of the motion, if I may. I think what Mr. Nedendrip is trying to accomplish is rather a modification of condition B1A. So the motion would be to merely modify B1A, condition B1A, to make it for 25-foot right-of-way would have a 10-foot exaction for that. That's really what you're trying to accomplish. You're not granting the appeal, you're modifying the appeal. And you're modifying the condition is really what you're trying to do.
I think we might be in a little bit of semantics here, but Sam Taylor, did you have language that you thought might get us to, or Sam Booth, where we need to be?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just as I heard Commissioner Neddenrip state that, so it would be amending condition B1A. B1 says that the final map, this is the parcel map that was approved by the administrative hearing panel, the final map must show the following. And then so it would read, the applicant shall dedicate a 10-foot public right-of-way to Douglas County along their property line fronting Genoa Lane or State Road 206 across the 25-foot private access and public utility easement serving parcel 8B. And that's the 2.5 acre parcel.
Does that sound acceptable, Mark? I think he
Absolutely.
dotted all the i's and crossed all the t's. Thank you, Sam Booth. We appreciate that. And thank you, Sam Taylor. Brian, is this with your approval as a seconder of the motion?
I might have wrote it differently, but it worked, so I'm going with it.
Thank you very much, Brian. Any further questions or clarifications? Thank you for bringing that to our attention, Christy. We always want to try and get the motions right. If there are no further clarifications or questions?
Just handle for the record.
Yes.
So for super layman's terms, we'd be granting the 10-foot dedication on the 2-acre parcel, and then the future acreage, when it came in to be split again, could then be determined if the 10 feet would be granted at that time.
Mark is shaking his head yes as the maker of the motion, and I would concur.
Okay, thank you.
Any other clarifications or discussion? If not, I'll call the roll on this, which is Mark's modified motion to grant the appeal. We'll start with you, Nick.
Nay.
And Christy?
Christy Kendall for the record, aye.
Bryce?
Aye.
Mark?
Aye.
Brian?
Aye.
And the chair would vote nay for the reasons that I stated further. I think the precedent should be the granting of the entire right-of-way. So on this, there would be 4 votes aye and 2 votes nay, so the motion is agreed to. And I believe, unless staff would correct me otherwise, that would dispense of the agenda item that we have for consideration today. And if that's the case, we will move to closing public comment. At this time, public comment will be taken on those items that are within the jurisdiction and control of the Planning Commission, or those agenda items where public comment has not already been taken. If you have public comment, again, please come to the microphone, sign in, state your name.
Surprised? Jim Slade. I'm sure that all the planning commissioners have had training in the open meeting law. One of the basic tenets of the OML is the requirement that the agenda include, quote, a clear and complete statement as to the topics to be considered during the meeting. Item 1 on last month's agenda was, quote, for possible action, discussion on whether to amend the Planning Commission bylaws to require commission members to attend meetings in person, subject only to limited exceptions. That seems pretty clear as to the topic to be discussed. Yet Member Kendall, in her lengthy prepared comments, in her very first sentence stated, I believe there's a bigger discussion that we need to have as a community in relation to how we run our Planning Commission and Board of County Commissioner meetings. In her nearly 7-minute speech, she barely mentioned anything about commission members attending meetings in public. She spent far more time talking about the importance of the public being allowed to comment on the record remotely. The problem, of course, is that that was not part of the clear and complete agenda item. Member Kendall should have known that before she prepared her comments. Chairman Walder, as well as Deputy DAs Taylor and Ritchie, all should have recognized that immediately, that she was violating the open meeting law, as I did. One of them should have interrupted her, informed her that what she was discussing was not on the agenda, and to only discuss what was clearly stated in the agenda. But unfortunately, that didn't happen. She strayed off topic in many directions as well, but her main focus was public participation, as when she said, quote, when we went back to in-person participation only, we went back to excluding a large portion of our community from participating in their local government. That subject, of course, was not on the agenda and hence was an OML violation. Now, one can argue that the subject of public participation is a worthy topic for the Planning Commission to discuss, and I would agree. I do think that the public should be allowed to comment by Zoom or telephone in some manner, but that topic would have to be agendized separately. After all, if there's one topic, one single topic that the public should be informed is going to be on the agenda, it's public participation in committee meetings, commission meetings. The Nevada Supreme Court emphasized the OML, that the OML, quote, seeks to give the public clear notice of the topics to be discussed so that the public can attend a meeting when an issue of interest will be discussed. To me, this is one of the clearest violations of the OML I've seen. I would remind the Commission that this is the same requirement of the OML, that the agenda be clear and complete, that the Office of the Attorney General found the Planning Commission to have violated just 2 years ago. I would suggest that Member Kendall, Chairman Walder, and Deputy DA Taylor apologize here and now for allowing that open meeting law violation. Otherwise, you may be asked to explain your position to the Office of the Attorney General.
Thank you very much. Is there additional public comment? I'd be happy to explain my position in allowing members to speak freely at the last meeting on that agenda item. I do not believe it was an open meeting law violation. We took no action on that item, and if anyone would like to file an open meeting law complaint, they can certainly do that at their pleasure, and I would be happy to respond in a formal fashion to any party that seeks to consider that matter. Any other comments from members of the Planning Commission? If there are no other comments from members of the Planning Commission, I do want to thank the staff efforts on today's meeting. I want to thank all of the parties that participated. I want to thank all of my colleagues on the Planning Commission for their excellent preparation and presentations. Thank you very much to the staff who's working behind the scenes, Colleen, and all the people in the clerk's office. We appreciate your extra effort on this meeting. So with that, I will call the meeting adjourned. Thank you.